So we can pick another one. We have one in Fort Washington if I'm there. Well, folks, it's 7 p.m. and we'd like to commence our meeting of the Economic Development Committee of Abington Township. I'd like to welcome our committee members here, and I'd also like to make a particular welcome to our two new committee members, Randy Elton down in the, am I fair to say red hair on my right? And then Mike McPaul with the salt and pepper hair on my left.
No, that would be me.
That would be you. That would be
so
you.
If I could just say, if you're going to speak, we're going to be televised, so try to speak into the microphone.
Okay. So welcome to both of you. I think those of you on the committee have seen their bios in the past. Randy comes to us with a great background in urban and regional planning, as well as having done some grant writing. Is currently working for the Warminster Township as an assistant manager, and has worked in various other townships, so brings a wealth of knowledge from other townships that we should be able to utilize. And Mike started his career in the public accounting sector, and has graduated into doing a lot of real estate investment work, both professionally as well as personally. So has both the financial analytical skills as well as the real estate experience skills that we were looking for in new committee members. So welcome to both of you. In addition, I'd like to welcome those of you in the audience who have come to hear the presentation this evening on the student housing property project that Penn State is proposing. That's going to be the sole item on our agenda this evening, because we want to make sure we allow enough time to address it. And with that, I would ask that the presentation presenter, I guess, is you, Mark Jonas, the attorney for the Penn State contingent.
Good evening. I'm Mark Jonas. I represent Penn State Abington and also Turner Construction. And I hope we will not be discussing my hair tonight, because it will be a very short subject.
I'm the wrong person to be talking about any kind of hair, so go ahead.
We have, I think, a fairly concise presentation within the time limits that the chair has advised us of. We're going to begin with Chancellor Sandler, who will give you an overview of the project from Penn State's Abington perspective and from its role as a longtime partner within the Abington community. Following that will be David Oddie, architect, who will give you a thumbnail sketch of the plans, both site plans and architectural plans. And then our cleanup hitter will be Todd Pool, who will have the bulk of our presentation and discuss the economic impact study that he has worked on. I think it would be helpful for me to give you just a real short synopsis of what is before the Township Board of Commissioners, so you have a context. The property is owned PB planned business. This is one of a number of properties in the township that is owned PB. If you look at the PB district, it is a very broad district with an array of uses, mixed uses, commercial uses, and residential uses. So it is important for us just to emphasize that we are not changing the zoning map. We're not changing where PB is. We are simply proposing to inject a new use into that, and that is a student housing use. So this is a zoning text amendment that is before the Township Board of Commissioners. It has been reviewed by the County Planning Commission. It has been reviewed by the Township Planning Commission. We are appearing again in front of the Township Planning Commission this month, and eventually we'll go to a public hearing before the Board of Commissioners on June 24th. So this is a proposed text amendment. We're leaving PB intact, except for adding a student housing use in a district that is already very broad and complex in terms of what it permits. So with that, I will introduce Chancellor Sandler, who you all know.
Thank you. Ooh, it's loud. So I've been presenting about this project several times, and I've talked a lot about the educational setting. I've talked about the sustainability and the number of students who would be living there, and I thought it would be helpful in this context to take a little bit of a different approach. So I have only a few remarks, and I want to put them into kind of an educational and economic context. So the purpose for this building is to provide 400 students, approximately 400 students, with a different living option. And what I mean by that is that we are primarily a commuter campus. We've been that way for a long time, and we will continue to be that. We also have students from out of state or out of the area, or international students who seek to come here, and they find housing in the area, usually in an apartment complex, sometimes by renting rooms in a private home, and sometimes even by purchasing, someone in the family purchasing a property and letting the students live there for their time. This option is different, but for them it's different, but it's common at all other universities in the area, most of all of them, and that is to give them an opportunity to live in a residence hall with adult supervision and with all the opportunity for educational programming that first-year students and above need. So that's what I mean when I say they need a different living option. These 400 students will be part of the overall enrollment of 4,000 at the college. The other purpose that is very, very important is to work to enhance the visibility and the excitement around Abington as a college town, as a destination town with the cultural and educational and athletic opportunities that a college town often offers. And that's very important for us too. One of the reasons it's important is that Penn State Abington for more than 20 years has been an active partner with many of the organizations within Abington. And I actually made a list. I hope I don't forget anybody, but just to give you an idea. Abington Township, Abington School District, the Eastern Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, the Abington Arts Center, Abington Memorial Hospital, PAL of Abington, Citizens and Police Together, and the Abington YMCA, just to name the ones that I could come up with very quickly, and there are others. And so for 20 years, we've been a contributing member of this community as a collaborator, as a partner, and taking the lead when needed to promote the well-being of this township. And just to give you some examples, I put them on the slide, of how we can contribute, again, to the educational and the economic climate of the township. Clearly, first is the community of students, faculty, and staff, that whole body of people who are active creating knowledge and providing education and applying the education locally. One of the ways they apply that knowledge locally is by serving as volunteers and as interns, both paid and unpaid. And in the report you're going to see, you'll see a list of the organizations where our students have contributed. And hopefully they will, through their internship, succeed in college and then decide that some of them at least will stay and live and work here in Abington. That's very important for us. We graduate about 500 students a year, just to give you a context. As part of their education, many of our students have what we call a capstone course in their major, and that frequently gives them an opportunity to serve as unpaid consultants in certain projects. And the ones that I think of in particular are IT projects and in marketing. So those are some examples of another way for them to, again, to learn at the same time as they contribute. And finally, we just received from Penn State University a $50,000 seed grant to partner with Abington Arts Center, and then we'll also be partnering with this committee, the Economic Development Committee, to establish what we're calling an innovation lab, innovation center at Abington Arts Center, which will be open to residents and faculty and staff and students. And we're hoping to involve the local schools as well in that, just to get the idea of STEM education and innovation, creativity moving at an earlier age. And so that's the context I wanted you to hear this presentation, because we are really trying very hard in all we do to make a positive impact on the local economy, not just economically, but also educationally. Thanks.
So, thanks, Karen, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to present the project here tonight. As Karen has noted, it's a 400-bed facility. That's broken down into 88 student apartments and 10 resident and assistant apartments, and then the 2 residence life apartments who are full-time trained faculty, parking on site, and as Mark noted, the PB, the planned district. This is the existing site, and Old York Road here, Brook Road here. This is the former Saturn dealership, the temple next door, and a variety of businesses across the street, including the library, a large residential neighborhood here, and then directly to the east and undeveloped as of today, open parcel. Just to show a before image, the red line represents the property, and you can see that there's an existing buffer, a nice buffer of trees, and our design proposes to maintain all of those trees and actually enhance this buffer to increase the tree canopy. You see the building footprint here in the center with the parking tucked on the short ends of the site, hidden from view as much as possible. Karen talked about the facility and Penn State Abington in general being interested in education, and that's how we've approached this facility. Even though its primary purpose is residence, we really want to focus on sustainability and education and have those systems, the green systems, visible to those living here and to those who pass by. And one of the primary strategies is stormwater management, so we have a series of rain gardens in the front of the site to manage the rain that falls on the site, keep it on site versus introducing it to the municipal storm sewer. We've designed this facility as a multimodal facility, so thinking about not only how do students walk here, ride their bikes, but as many of you know, there's a very robust shuttle system, and we've designed a shuttle drop-off associated with the front door, the main entrance. So really thinking about how to integrate this design into the physical community. As far as inspiration, we've looked to the campus, a lot of the stone and masonry buildings that you see there, and so although this is a more contemporary building, we're taking an inspiration from that masonry, and as you can pick up here, the base of the building is all stone, a similar stone to what you see on the Abington campus, and then vertical elements to mark key parts of the building are carried up vertically. So this is the main entrance. There's a covered canopy here with a series of stone piers, and these are the stormwater rain gardens that I mentioned a moment ago. The other materials on the building are a mixture of tan brick and a darker gray brick, again taking the inspiration from the colors of the campus. Breaking down the scale of the building, this is, as I said, the main entrance. Stepping back, this is a view that's taken from the Park Memorial across the street. And you can see how we've used the variety of materials to break down the scale of the building. A large 5-story building, but taking pieces, breaking it down to 4-story, and then also introducing components of glass that reflect the common study areas and meeting rooms in the building. And this same quality of material is taken 360 degrees around the building. So the east side of the building likewise has a mixture of stone and masonry. And just to show some of examples of the work that my office has done in the past, so the quality that Penn State is very committed to this being a 50 to 100-year facility. We've talked a lot throughout the design process thus far about durability and permanence of this facility, and we've designed 2 residence halls for Penn State in the last 10 years, one at the Harrisburg campus and one at the Berks campus in Reading. And then the other examples here are work that we've done for the DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the state park system. All the buildings that you see here are green buildings. 3 out of the 4 are LEED certified. The first was built prior to LEED certification, but takes advantage of many of the green strategies that are part of LEED. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Todd Pool with Forward Planning. We are land use economists, and what I like to say is we get to play Sim City for real. Just by way of background, we work principally in the eastern United States. We do a variety of economic and real estate analysis assignments. More close to home, our clients include SEPTA, PennDOT, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. As a matter of fact, if you've driven any stretch of the Turnpike, any construction that you've seen, my firm has analyzed it on behalf of the Turnpike Commission, as well as PennDOT throughout the entire Commonwealth. We've developed economic impact analyses for them. So we do this type of work quite often, and we were charged with analyzing what the construction impacts would be, as well as the long-term impacts of the new construction that has just been presented. So I'm going to bring up my presentation. Okay. So clearly you're familiar with the area where the campus is and where the buildings are going to go. I'm not going to spend too much time here. This was obviously part of our background, is to understand the context. And the context is going to be important. It is important, but it's going to be particularly important when I start talking about the proximity effect and the impacts that it may or may not have on adjacent residential properties. So we'll get to that in a moment. So, what is welcome to Economics 101. What is economic impact analysis? Quite simply, it's looking at what happens when you put a dollar into any economy of any size and how that dollar ripples through. I mean, it's that simple. Obviously, there's a lot of complexities to it, but effectively, that's what underpins this analysis. So, to the extent that Penn State is providing direct investment for the development of the student apartments, that has both indirect and induced impacts. Indirect, for example, would be supplies, building materials have to be purchased to build the facility, all right? That ripples through the economy. It clearly goes beyond the Abington Township area, but Abington Township can participate in that type of indirect impacts. And it's not just for purchases, it's obviously for employment and also economic output that's generated, taxes and so forth. This concept of induced, which is really a subset of indirect, is when folks are hired in the local area because of this project, and those individuals who are hired, they get a paycheck and they go and spend locally, and they go to the grocery store or the shoe store or the pharmacy, that's induced. All right, that was brought about because, indirectly they were hired for this project. They received compensation, and they spent that compensation not only locally, but partially locally. So we count that as well, and then we ultimately get to the total effects. We're going to walk you through the numbers. In terms of total numbers, 183 new jobs are projected, and that considers both during the construction period, which we've identified as 2015 to 2017, that 2-year construction period, which may adjust somewhat, and then taking it out over what we refer to as a stabilization period. So after the building is built, it's occupied, and you have a small number of employees who are hired to administer the apartments. You also have that indirect effect of new people being hired in the local area because there's now permanent, or there's students who are more permanently stationed here, albeit on a 8-month basis, Chancellor, is that correct? Yes. But those dollars that would otherwise be spent outside of Abington are now drawn into Abington Township, again, kind of creating that indirect and induced effect on local employment, on economic output, on taxes. So that's counted as part of the 183 new jobs. Clearly, the majority of the new full and part-time jobs that are created really occur in that first 2-year phase of construction, all right? And that's not a great surprise. We're talking about a student, apartment building, so you wouldn't expect to see, this be very labor intensive. Nonetheless, there will be net new employment as a result of the building. Over $35 million in, total economic impact as a result of building the building. Again, direct, indirect, induced. that, the local economy as well as the regional economy benefits from that. We've estimated that approximately $1.1 million in tax revenues. Now, before you get excited, those tax revenues that we're identifying here, the majority of which are going to the state, okay? We'll get to the fiscal impacts a little bit later, but these taxes principally will be generated, in terms of sales taxes, wage taxes, and then use taxes, that some of which may stay here. A large percentage will obviously make its way outside of the locality. On net, we see a positive economic contribution to your community, which is a good thing. And then, as the Chancellor spoke about internships and volunteerism, we've done a number of assignments where we are able to identify the value of volunteerism, or what we refer to as time value of somebody's labor, okay? So if I volunteer tomorrow across the street sweeping the sidewalk and cleaning windows, there's a value to that, all right? In economic jargon, we refer to that as a non-cash value because no one's paying me to do it, but there's a value for having done so, right? And so we use that type of technique to capture the value of student internships and volunteerism in your community. This chart's showing you that we identified or performed our economic impact analysis on a 6-zip code study area, which effectively comprises Abington Township. And then in the table itself, we've broken out by time period and the types of, or the categories of impact. So construction, total investment and spending, $19.2 million. Total employment as a result of that construction, 122 persons. That's full and part-time. So that when you see these numbers, in economic impact analyses, there is no way to break out what's full or what's part-time. It's combined, okay? So those are both full and part-time jobs that are captured. And then 28 million plus in total economic output, and then, of course, again, the state and local taxes to the right. And you come on down, you see that we've performed a student spending analysis, total investment in spending with the students and the employees that will have basically materialize as a result of that spending, and then we take it out over a 10-year period, 2017 to 2026, and we look at the economic output and state and local taxes. So combined, total investment and spending over that 10-year period, starting with 2015, we're estimating, and again, keep in mind this is a snapshot in time that we're working with, all right, and this is not an exact science, but what we're trying to do is get you in the ballpark of what's real. We expect over that 10-year period that total investment spending will be about $22 million. A total of 183 jobs will have materialized at some point, most of which are not permanent. And then economic output over 35 million, and then the, like I said, the 1.1 million in state and local taxes. This is a finer grain look at the economic impacts of the housing construction, just that 2-year period. And what's interesting to look at here is, in addition to the direct employment that takes place, we've also looked at the industries that are most impacted by this investment, right? So it's not, clearly it's not just the construction industry or those industries that supply the construction industry. As you can see on the table here, retail clothing, retail miscellaneous store retailers, a lot of retail, which is to say that when new workers come in here to build this building, and other people are coming in here ultimately to have a permanent job, they're spending their dollars at your local stores, okay, which is not a bad thing. And I will say this, that, and we were talking about this earlier, the value of commercial real estate, specifically retail, office real estate, is really based on the rental values that they can get. Those rental values, in turn, are based on the volume of, in the case of retail, what kind of sales they can make. So to the extent that the Penn State project will help to improve retail conditions in your community, that should also result in ultimately higher rents and ultimately a greater rateable value to the municipality. So it's a good thing.
Todd, I assume you'll entertain questions as you go through.
Yeah, and I apologize. Please stop me at any point if you want to ask a question about anything. So, and I also apologize. I know this is a little fuzzy to look at, but this particular slide is showing you the employment impacts of the housing construction, and it's just breaking it out. Probably not all that well for you in this lighting, but it's breaking it out by direct, indirect, and induced jobs, with direct jobs being green. So you can see that construction obviously represents the lion's share of direct employment. Yellow represents Yellow represents indirect. So those are the jobs, kind of that secondary jobs that get created. And then blue is induced. Again, somebody getting hired to help work on the site, or ultimately being hired to work at the facility. They have a new job here and they're spending dollars locally. So this will be in your presentation as well as in the final report, so you can take a look at that. This is a finer grain look at student spending profile. We do, as I mentioned, we do a number of analyses. We do a fair amount of retail analysis. And in this particular case, we focused on how college students spend. Now, of course, college students really just have discretionary income. I mean, all of their income is disposable, and all of that is pretty much discretionary. And so using a third-party source, in this case, College Explorer, the 2013 edition, we were able to extrapolate how these students who are going to take up residency at the apartments will likely spend their discretionary dollars locally. Please also note, and this is important because not all retail studies do this, but we recognize with all of us that we don't always spend all of our discretionary dollars in the place where we live or even where we work, right? We spend dollars all over the place. And so we make adjustments for that fact. And so if you look at the screen here, we have a factor or factors that we use to determine how much of the discretionary income do we expect to be spent locally. And so thus you have percentage spent in study area, so it varies. Grocery stores, we expect the majority of their discretionary dollars on groceries to be spent locally. Dining out, 58%, or basically 6 out of every $10 to be spent locally. That will go up or down, but basically they're not going to be spending 100% of their dollars in Abington Township. And then you have convenience stores, again, the higher margin there, or higher factor for spending locally, apparel, entertainment, and so forth. So this gives you a sense, and again, I think if we have any retailers in the audience or local businesses in the audience, this is a positive thing for you to have this type of prospective spending or consumerism taking place. This is the 10-year project stabilization and spending from 2017, from the point that we have identified the building opening all the way through 2026. And we have the employment impacts of that 10-year stabilization. So you're seeing these numbers here: direct, indirect, induced, the total effect. The majority of these jobs are being created not in the apartments. I believe we're talking about a half a dozen jobs actually materializing at the apartments themselves. The rest of these jobs are really jobs that will take place in the local community. Okay, some will be outside, but the majority of which will be inside the community. And then we have economic impacts of the 10-year stabilization, and then we have these broken down on the right-hand side by industry.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sure. So, being that there's the majority of these students will not have cars, would that lead one to believe that the money spent in the community would probably be greater than would otherwise be anticipated because they don't have the ability to drive outside the community?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I mean, they're going to be kind of a captured audience, if you will. I mean, obviously they have access to the shuttle. To the extent that they don't have an automobile means that they are less likely on a daily basis to go, outside of Abington to make purchases. So in that way, it's kind of like being at an airport. You're stuck. But in a good way. Obviously, it's supporting the town.
Yeah.
And this is the 10-year project stabilization and spending chart from 2017 to 2026. And in this particular example, we're showing you, and again, it's very difficult to see at the bottom, but it's the employment direct and indirect induced that results over that 10-year stabilization period by industry sector. So clearly, retail trade, which you would expect, these are students, they have discretionary income, their greatest influence is going to be over the retail sector. And then lesser still, educational services, accommodation and food services. And at the bottom axes there, we're showing you the employment numbers that result, from that student spending. And it's not just, let me say this too, this is not just student spending that we're picking up, we're also picking up some of the people that have jobs as a result of these students being housed locally and their spending as well. When people go out for lunch or stay for dinner. We talked about this issue of capturing time value or the value of someone's time when it's not compensated, or in economic jargon, non-market value economics. We have identified, based on the data that's been provided to us by Penn State, that approximately the value of that time represents approximately 35 jobs, 3.3 million in economic output, and ultimately would result in $72,700 in state and local taxes, if in fact it were really monetized as value. All right, and you need to think about it in these terms. While the students aren't being paid, and obviously because they're not being paid, they're not being taxed, the value that they do provide, you do realize in different ways. It's not always easily quantifiable, but to the extent that someone has volunteered time locally, whether it be for a business, for residents, that may be a service cost that the township avoids having to provide. And typically with college students, that is the case. When they're providing volunteer hours, usually the volunteer hours that they are providing is a replacement of what local government would otherwise, or state government would otherwise provide. So in that way, it is avoidance of cost. To the right, and again, we are provided the number of the organizations by Penn State. These are the various organizations, volunteer service organizations that are associated with the college. And you can see there are quite a number of them. And then this would be the student internships, the organizations that provide student internships locally. And I'm not sure if any of these go outside of Abington Township, Chancellor?
Yes, a lot of them do, but
Yeah.
the first grouping, you can see Abington before the names.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, an extensive list. So we were also asked to basically take a look at what the impacts to local property values might be. You're building a new college dormitory or college apartment building, and if you're a local resident, the first thing you might think of is, wow, how is my real estate value impacted by that? And we do a number of studies. A lot of the studies that we do focus on the economic value of green space or parks and trails and the value they create on the built environment. We use a similar technique in this case, and the technique is referred to as a proximity effect. And all of you basically have been exposed to it. You may not have known it in those terms, but think about it this way. If you have your house is on this side of the block, and the house across the street is boarded up and blighted, all right, your house is worth something less than it otherwise would be. Tomorrow, someone comes in, buys that house, unboards it, paints it, gets it occupied. Your house just realized an uptick in value and you've done nothing, right? So that's an example of the proximity effect at work. Same thing would be for the development of the student apartments. It has a influence to some degree. What we did was we looked at how many single-family homes were within a reasonable area that would likely be influenced. So in this case, we identified 21 single-family homes within 450 feet of the proposed student housing. We identified the average assessed value of values between $194,000 and $422,000, with the greatest, that $422,000 value being in what we refer to as Zone 1, so it's closest to where the apartments are to be built. We also did a literature review, looking at the influence that multifamily apartments, which this is referred to as a multifamily apartment building, have on single-family homes. The literature is pretty clear that, and save for cases where you've got a slumlord that's not taking care of their property, multifamily housing does not have a deleterious effect on single-family properties, generally speaking. Okay? Again, to the extent that nuisances are kept to a minimum, that is the case, and we expect that to be the case for the apartments. And then we're also aware that the site where this property is a former car dealership, right, Saturn car dealership, and so it presents a grayfield redevelopment potential. If, in fact, it weren't redeveloped with student apartments, there's a possibility that it could still be a unused former auto dealership, which does have a blighting effect on the area in some respects. So, that's the trade-off. Yes, it could be developed, possibly as something else, but the fact of the matter is there's no guarantee of that. Here, we're talking about something that's already planned and will go forward, hopefully. This is just showing you the analysis that we performed looking at the zones. One house was identified within that Zone 1 within slightly greater than 150 feet from the proposed apartments. Zone 2, we identified 6 housing units, again, all single family, and in Zone 3, 14 housing units, and that zone is between 300 and 450 feet away. And then we looked at the assessed values. That's the green bars that you see on the bottom, and we took the average values of those properties. We take the average values of the properties because they go into the model that we use to do the proximity effect value. These are just some highlights from the literature review that we performed. I'm not going to read these, but and I will also say that there isn't a ton of literature on college apartments. However, the multifamily apartment complex, which again, the units that are going to be built would be considered, there's a lot of application to the literature that does exist to this type of project. So that's what we applied here. And then finally, we performed a separate fiscal impact analysis on the project. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. As of right now, and I say as of right now because we know that numbers could change based on based on identification of other revenue sources that might come into play. But as of right now, we identified a net cost to the municipality on an annualized basis of about just under $35,000 a year. That nets out an annual sewer revenue stream of about $13 million, or I'm sorry, $13,000, excuse me. And it also takes into consideration, I know, I gave people a heart attack there. It also takes into consideration the amount of service that the university provides for its facility. So in other words, it has its own emergency security force. It provides for its own sanitation. Things that otherwise the township would have to provide for. The university is covering the vast majority of that. So it is going to be mitigating a lot of the costs that, let's say, if this were a market rate apartment building, the student apartments that are being built here are mitigating a lot of those costs that would otherwise be incurred by the municipality. The bottom figure here, over $700,000 in municipal revenues, to be precise, about $722,000. That represents the upfront fees that we have estimated that will be paid to Abington Township as a result of the construction. A lot of that being in the form of permit fees and so forth in order to go forward with the construction. So that's a one-time number, but it's significant, and particularly it's significant relative to the annual cost or net costs that we're showing you.
Can I just ask a quick question? So basically $700,000 related to fees to the township, but then you're saying there's approximately $34,000 in annual costs to the township.
Net service costs.
That
right.
potentially would not be reimbursed because the applicant's a nonprofit.
Potentially, but I don't have any.
And I just want to, I just want to ask the question and just get it out there. Obviously, this is here of the applicant, if we can. Would the applicant be willing, and this is just a key identifier here, to pay some sort of annual impact fee to defer the cost so that there is not an impact on the township for any kind of costs as a discussion point?
Yeah, let me preface the response by saying that we have just received from the township solicitor an opinion letter citing some cases in support of those discussions. We haven't completely done an analysis of that, but based upon the solicitor's opinion, that is a discussion that the applicant would undertake.
So the applicant would consider, could consider no commitment, but would consider an annual impact fee that would defer any potential cost to the township?
Yes, and keep in mind also that in the context of land development, we might see some additional fees and improvements coming into play.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And this is kind of looking under the hood at the fiscal analysis that we perform, and really, just for those who are curious about, how do we come up with the numbers, and this is an internal spreadsheet that we use. It is based on Burchell Listikin's fiscal impact model. That's really the most widely used fiscal impact model in the country. We've made adjustments to it to reflect local service costs, revenues, population figures, and so forth. Effectively, what we identified is that on a per capita basis, the average per capita service cost is approximately $235. And then we take a percentage of that cost and associate it with, being a student, and then we actually reduce that cost pro rata, given the fact that these students are not going to be here a full year, basically 8 months out of the year. So we take that into consideration. Those are service costs that would not be incurred during that period they're not here. And then we run it through our model, and ultimately we were able to come up with a public service cost number. Again, it's an estimate, it's a snapshot in time, and then that's offset with the annual $13,000 plus in sewer revenue. So that's how we ultimately get to that net number, which is here. And I believe yes, sir, I'm sorry.
So I have a question, I guess, in terms of impact on other multifamily owners in the area, because I would imagine that adding 400 more folks that are not renting from local, the competitive nature of the drop in their rental income, is there an impact or a calculation of impact on the business privilege tax that might be lost, the lower rental income to those owners and their values of those properties, because it is tied to the net income of those properties?
Sure. Well, here's my understanding. Given that this facility is principally for freshmen, these freshmen would not have lived here the year prior, or let's put it this way, these freshmen would not be renting their own units, the year prior, assuming that they're coming right from high school. In that respect, and because of that, there probably would be de minimis, influence on the local market rate rental housing market because they're coming into this market new.
But the following year, they would have been looking for more local multifamily units to live in.
That's possible, but again, this is a new project, so it is not as if the existing multifamily landlords have been dependent upon that type of revenue. Yes, it would have been a boon to them, perhaps. Then again, you'd also have to think that having up to 400 freshmen in residential neighborhoods wouldn't. I don't know if you want to be sitting on that dais.
I'm thinking more of the sophomores and as.
Well, I can
as
say
they
one
move
thing.
around,
The one purpose-built student housing project that caters to Penn State Abington is in Upper Moreland. So I don't think.
But there are some that do rent in the area from private owners.
I agree.
Individual owners.
I agree with
There
that.
is-
The one thing, though, that I think it will, the interesting, and I think this is more of a Penn State-specific thing, so if you're going to be bringing 400 freshmen to live in the area that previously did not live in the area, I guess, and this is more a question for Karen, I would imagine, are they more likely sophomore year to want to live in the area because they did, in fact, live here freshman year and have the full 2 to 4 year live-in college experience?
Yes, we think they will be.
Okay.
And also
Just wanted to understand.
the composition of the entering class is going to change when we have more opportunities for housing. Specifically, international is a good example. Out of state is a good example. Right now, we sort of run out of places for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing to consider that's important is that a good number of these freshman students will probably be supplying their labor to local businesses and stores. So in answer to that question, I would imagine that not all, but certainly a good number of them would want to live locally if they retain those jobs when they come back.
Thank you.
So Todd, is that the essence of your presentation?
We are done.
Okay. We want to open this up to questions and discussion, and I'd like to do that first with our committee. Everyone in the room will have a chance to ask a question or provide any comment, but I'd like to open up to our committee. Everyone received this in advance, this study in advance, so presumably you've had a chance to review it. Perhaps some of your questions have been clarified already by Todd's presentation, but if not, I'd like to recognize those questions and comments now. Oh, come on.
Todd, related to the College Explorer data that you used in terms of average spending per year, I guess, have you used that before? Is that reliable numbers? And are they annual figures or are they school year figures? So are we talking about 8-month figures or 12-month figures?
Both, yes. Those are average annual figures based on average annual, where students live during the college year. So, yes, it is not a full year, but it's their annual, expenditure while they're in that community.
So
it is
like
it's a national number, so, we have to consider that might not reflect exactly what these students might spend, but, the source of the data, that's what they study, is they study college consumerism.
So a Penn State main campus that has 12 months a year of students is in that figure, as well as,
Right, but
Midwestern schools whose dollars are,
Right,
are not
right.
as large as
Right.
a municipality such as ours.
Right, but the skewing of the data would definitely be for a traditional college school year, so simply because the vast majority of college students are only there for 8 months,
Thank you.
It's an interesting topic. So you're bringing in, and this is more for Karen too, so all of a sudden you're creating 400 freshmen that are now part of this community. I guess, is it a general move to change the composition of the campus to try to have more people, living in the vicinity? So in essence, if there's 400 freshmen that are here that typically would not live in the area, would be potentially commuters. I guess sophomore year, the feeling is that they're going to remain in the community, which actually would create more housing needs, I think, sophomore and junior year, which would be kind of I would say, a multiplier effect of having more people living in the community spending dollars. Would that be accurate? I hadn't even thought about it that way until you brought it up, but it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yes, I think you're right. I'm looking over at Mrs. Siegel, who's our expert, and wonder if you want to, is that okay if she comments on this?
Absolutely.
No, I would agree. I would absolutely agree. I see students after a first.
Maybe you could identify yourself and speak into the microphone,
Yeah,
please.
sorry, put her on the spot.
I'm Gail Siegel. I'm the Senior Director of Student Affairs. I think it is very typical for a college student to spend their first year in a residence hall or an apartment, a student building. And then after that, many leave after their second year and they go into the community. They're still part of that community, but they prefer a different lifestyle. So I think it's very typical that you'll then have those students out in the community spending their dollars in the community, but in a different facility.
So I guess it would be difficult for a student to live outside the home and then come back to their parents the second year. I don't think that would be very good for the parents or the student, as someone whose child just came back from college and wants to stay out every night, so.
The student may want to do it, the parents would not.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
May I add on to that too, Michael? A couple of things. One is that some of our students, about half of our students will go to University Park at the end of their second year. So that will take them and their money out of the area. But what we found is more and more they seem to be very interested in staying here because they want to stay in the Philadelphia area. And sometimes they say, well, I would stay, but I want the full college experience, which means they may want to stay in that residence hall for one more year, too, which we've provided for in our planning.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that in the case of the freshmen, because they will be without automobiles, that's favorable to spending more dollars locally. In other words, they are not going to be spending dollars on gasoline and auto insurance and auto repairs. So the dollars they're not spending on those types of services, those dollars are going to make their way back into the community. And I do know this from our demographic studies. The lower the income of a resident or anyone, the higher the percentage of that income that's spent. Okay. As a matter of fact, in the case of really low-income people, they actually spend more than what they earn. And people say, well, how is that possible? Because of government transfer is what makes that possible. But in the case of students, they act in a similar way. They basically spend every dollar that they receive, so they're not saving it. And in the case of what we're talking about here, the majority of those dollars are going to probably stay local to the extent that there are businesses catering to their wants and needs. Now, I will say that you will probably also get new businesses that will establish because of this residence hall, which is a good thing.
Todd, I believe you talked about one-time fees that would be paid to Abington Township that were in the order of like $700,000?
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
I guess a question for Karen. Did you mention that some of the freshmen will stay in the dorm as sophomores? Was I understand? So there's a percentage that will stay there?
Well, we don't know that, but we're expecting it. It's going to be a nice facility, and it's close, and it's shuttled, so they probably will. Right. But we will have to limit the number because of the car situation.
New freshmen coming in after that.
Exactly.
And is the class that's coming in, is there an increase in the number of students that are going to be accepted at Abington now, at the campus?
No, I mean, it's just you mean because of this?
Yes.
No, we're just hoping that we'll have a different mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
The construction costs for the actual physical property, you're spending how much on the project, would you assume? Was it $20 million or?
David? Or Bill? Yeah.
You could come to the microphone, please. Thanks. State your name.
I'm Bill Swanson. I'm the project exec for Turner Construction Company. We've been working on the pre-con part of the project for almost a year now, and we're expected to start with demolition of the Saturn dealership in December of this year. Right now, the GMP is calculated at $47,200,000.
And that's for 88 units.
That's for this building that was presented today.
Okay. $47 million. Okay.
Any other questions from the committee? Judith?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. And it's, excuse me, it's more anecdotal than it is anything else. That as the person who's overseen construction for Abington Hospital for many, many years, and also as somebody who went to college once, from a very long time ago, I can tell you that, I mean, I can remember the in-flight being so grateful to us when we did construction because the influx of people working and spending money was enormous. Granted, that was during construction. It was a limited period of time, but it had an enormous benefit, not only on in-flight, but everything else. And as a student, the fact is that I think what you said is absolutely correct. Students spend everything they have. That's not when they're thinking about retirement or planning for their future or saving. You know, whether it's in pizza or having to go to the drugstore or whatever it is, it seems to me just anecdotally that there would be an enormous, I can't quantify it the way you can, I have to assume for the moment that your information is accurate, but it seems to me that just on a common sense approach, there would absolutely be a positive impact to this township. And I say that again based on my experience at the hospital. Although different, similar enough, I think.
Bruce?
I have a question for David. Could you pull the site plan up, please?
Sure.
We hit on this before. You have 57 parking spaces, and I understand that you don't really possibly need more, but there is room for more. And I guess my question is, around the back of the property, I don't have a pointer, around the back of the property, it's very well landscaped. Did you talk to the fire marshal? Was he concerned about limited access around the building?
We have had conversations with the fire marshal, and it's not showing up here because that's by intent. It's not a road, but this is a reinforced turf that's acceptable. We've used it on a variety of different projects, including the two that I showed earlier, that does provide the safe, again, 360-degree loop around the building.
Okay, and do you think, Karen, over time there may be a need for some additional parking? And if so, why not put it in or provide for it now?
Well,
Go ahead first.
okay. My answer to that is as part of the design process for this facility, we've really tried to avoid having a building in a parking lot. And so we've by design, been very efficient in how we've laid out the parking, and we've intentionally provided two areas of green space, one as a public side of the building and one as a more private side of the building, by design.
Okay.
Will this be a sprinklered building?
Yes.
Bruce, I actually think that the first few years we'll have fewer first-year students, and as it goes along, we're going to have to reserve more and more spaces for first-year students. So the number of people who stay beyond that year will be fewer. So I don't anticipate the need for more parking spaces.
And, you know, the one comment I'll make as a developer who builds student housing and apartments, you're spending more on this project than I would ever contemplate spending on a Class A luxury project. So the quality of materials are going to have to be phenomenal. I mean, the quality is going to be great because it's just a very, very expensive, high-end project. So, I think to be at that level, it's going to be something that's going to be very nice.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. One more. And this may be a question for Mark. Mark?
Yes.
Has there been any discussion at all about talking to PennDOT about a signal cutting through Memorial Park? Because other than coming up the fairway and having the shuttle pick them up and then going up to Susquehanna, southbound 611 to get into this facility, it's difficult. And I guess the question is if it's conceivable to get the ground and to get a signal there, would Penn State consider it? Have they considered it? Are they looking into it?
We are looking into it in terms of a traffic impact analysis now, Bruce. We don't have any conclusions, and that certainly may be part of the scope of the discussions. I don't believe there have been any discussion with PennDOT yet, so we're waiting for the results of the study.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, seeing that there are no further questions from the committee, from a staff perspective, are there any questions that you have, Tara? Any other staff members here tonight? Okay, we'd be certainly happy to entertain any questions from the public that's here as well, and I would just remind everyone that the Economic Development Committee, its focus and purpose is really to look at the economic characteristics of projects here in the township. So if you have questions related to construction or design, that sort of thing, that's probably best asked at the Planning Commission session, which I believe is occurring later this month. But we certainly entertain any questions, and if we can, we will answer them. If not, we'll try to get back to you or refer you to the proper committee. And if you come forward, you feel free to state your name and address, and we'd like to try and limit comments to, like the Board of Commissioners do, to no more than 3 minutes. So
I'll
thank
be
you.
less than that, thank you. I'm Kathy Gauthier. I live at 1331 Birchwood Avenue, Roslyn, Pennsylvania, and I'm on the Township Planning Commission, but I am not representing them tonight. I just have 2 questions or comments. The one thing I didn't see tonight was the comparison of the tax revenue and economic impact. We saw it all for this, what's being proposed, which was great. It really answered a lot of my questions. But we didn't see what it would look like as a PB development of a likely use. So I was kind of interested as a Planning Commission member just to see what that difference is. And I was glad that whoever brought up the possible discussions of, looking at the impacts of how much tax revenue we might lose for a nonprofit in the PB district. So I guess that's one thing. I was looking forward to seeing some kind of comparison of uses, whether it be, for regular multifamily use there or a likely permitted private sector use. Okay, so that's just one deficiency I think that should be addressed. Question number 2, well, I guess that wasn't really a question, that's just my opinion. Is there a food plan will Penn State be, I guess I should be talking to you. Will there be my son is entering college, and of course I'm paying for dormitory and the food plan, et cetera. So with the restaurant assumptions, I just wanted to see if people are going to be eating on campus, in the dorm, or out in the private sector.
Well, there are, as you've seen, there are like kitchens in each apartment. So some of them will want to cook at their home, in their apartment, but there is a food plan available for the students, and we anticipate that a lot of them will take that.
Okay, and that will be at the dorm? Or
No, that will be at
campus?
At the campus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
As it relates to your first question, I'll just make a brief comment, and that is that this committee is really looking at what the owner of the property currently is proposing, and this is, we're not analyzing it against what other owners might have chosen to do with this property. So hence, that's why we don't have those numbers, unless Todd or anyone else would like to respond differently to that. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay. All right. Well, appreciate your coming to talk or listening to this presentation. One of the things that we as a committee do is, because we are an advisory board to the Board of Commissioners, we generally take a position on projects that are presented to us in this regard as to their economic viability and their economic benefit and impact to the township. And so I don't know if we're prepared to take action tonight, but I would certainly entertain a motion if someone had one.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for consideration by the Board of Commissioners. The Penn State Student Housing Project located at 1001 Old York Road in Abington Township is an economically viable project based on the impact analysis performed by Forward Planning and presented at the June 2nd Economic Development Committee meeting. Based on the recap, which I will go through in a minute, EDC recommends to the board to move forward with this project. That recap is basically between 2015 and 2017, 127 full-time and part-time permanent positions will be created. In addition, $28 million in total economic impact and $985,000 in state tax revenues will be collected. Between the years of 2017 and 2026, 45 new jobs generating $5.6 million in 2015 dollars and $26,000 in state revenues will be collected. In addition, volunteers, from a volunteer standpoint, Penn State residents, both paid and unpaid, who live in this dorm will support 35 full-time and part-time jobs, $3.3 million in economic output, and $72,000 in state tax revenues. In addition, you heard the consideration of a potential annual impact fee.
Okay, so we've heard a motion. Is there a second to that motion? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion on the table?
Doug?
Yes?
I'd just like to recuse myself from this vote.
I think that's an appropriate gesture.
And I'll just make the comment, as Commissioner Liaison to the Board, I do not vote on these matters. So.
Okay. So we have two of us on this dais that will not be voting. So, and you're not voting. Three of us, excuse me. Pretty soon we're going to be down to not too many, right? All right. With that, I'll take a vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So I get to do this. Motion carries. That's the final, or the only item on the agenda this evening. We thank you all for coming. Appreciate your input. Certainly appreciate the presentations made by you, Todd, by Mark, as well as David. And good luck in your course of action as you proceed. And Karen, thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Good job, Steve.